A new report from Pew Research is looking at what's happening with the nuns in our society. No, I'm not talking about the Catholic Church nuns. I'm talking about the NONES, one of the most rapidly growing groups in America. Those are the people who say they have no affiliation religiously with any organization. They represent people who just seem to be disengaged. And we're going to talk about some of that research today with our guest, Russ Ewell. He's executive minister of the Bay Area Christian Church in California. He has been ministering for more than 40 years. His teaching is rooted in providing hope for those turned off by tradition and infused with a vision for building the future. And in many ways, part of that is reaching the nuns. And that's what we're going to talk about today, along with some of that research. Russ, thanks so much for your time, for being with us on Missions Today.
It's great to be with you, and thanks for having me, Collin.
Let's, I don't know that I did it justice, but the nuns, these are the people basically who are not claiming affiliation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's about 28%, and Pew Research has been following this for some years. And in combination with that, I'd add they released in December a study of the whole United States regarding spirituality, and there is a connection there, but 28% of U.S. adults are religiously unaffiliated. That means that they don't connect themselves with any denomination or any group in particular at all. And amongst that group, interestingly enough, 49% say spirituality is important to them. And then I'm going to give one more number, not to overwhelm people, but 70% believe in God or a higher power. Now, the reason I mention those three numbers is because the tendency is when we read about these kind of studies, there's a framing that almost always takes place. People aren't going to church. And that's true because about 80% or so of them don't want to have anything to do with church in a committed way. But it misses the point that going to church or not going to church for people like this is not necessarily connected to their belief in God. As I alluded to, 70% believe in God or a higher power. Now, that's a personal thing for me because I was an agnostic. And so when I hit college, I was like, I don't know. And I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is a fairly religious town. And I can see by the look on your face that it's familiar to you. And the Bay Area is a lot like, Austin, you understand. And I think they're progressive areas, but sometimes they're highly populated by nuns. And me being one, I look at my experience and say, part of my problem was I didn't really have a good understanding of who God was. And so I was like, I'm not sure. And I think this connects to the A.W. Tozer quote, which I love, is the most important thing about a person is how they think about God. And so what happened to me is I met someone and I got to know them. There was no, religious conversation or anything. I looked at their life and I saw something special happening. So this group is important for every Christian to at least understand. If we meet them where they are, they're much more open, I think, to finding God than we think. And we can't let any kind of public framing make us think just because they don't go to church, they have no interest in God or the life-changing experience of being a Christian.
That's helpful. And before we move on to some of the specific research and then some of your thoughts and ideas, what you all have been doing to try to reach these nuns, I'd like to come back to your story for a minute. You talked about being agnostic heading into school. Did you have any religious foundations in your upbringing?
Well, my family was Methodist, but I was like 6. And as soon as I could get out of going to church, I did at age 7 by faking sick. I said, I'm so sick, I can't go. And then after that, I never had to go back again. I always found my way out. My grandmother was very committed. I think she was a Baptist, but again, I was like, yeah, that's good for you. And my dad would take her to church and I'd be like, no, I'm not going to go. And no one else would really go. And so I didn't have anything to do with it. Now, I think you'll be interested in, so will your listeners, with when I was in high school, Young Life was a big organization in our group. And I went to a public high school, so it wasn't a religious high school. And one of my best friends said to me, hey, Russ, you got to come to Young Life with me. And I'm like, well, I don't go to that stuff. I don't have anything to do with that. He goes, but if I bring a visitor tonight, we can win $20. Now, that got my attention. $20, because I had a car, but not always enough money to put gas in it. My parents give me some money, and they said, after you run out of this, you're on your own. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go to this Young Life. I'll endure it. I'll do it. So I went on in with him. We won the $20 because I was the only visitor. And everybody there knew me because I was always avoiding the Young Life leader. He was, he was always cruising around talking to kids. And every time I saw him coming, I played on the basketball team. He'd come into the stands and I'd leave and go up to the top of the stand so I wouldn't be around so he couldn't talk to me. And he knew me. He wasn't a bad guy. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So here I am sitting in his basement and they're playing songs and I'm like, I don't like the music. They're having a conversation about stuff I didn't understand because I had never read the New Testament, Collin. So I'm sitting here going, I don't understand this. What's this all about? And so I got done and they asked me, hey, Jim, enjoy it? Did you like it? You going to come back? I said, oh, yeah. Never went back at all. Got to college and I was not at all religious and I was moving further away from it, if that's possible, right? And then my sophomore year, I met a guy playing basketball, and he was really good. I mean, I was working for the school athletic department, and I was a supervisor of referees and umpires. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to go check it out. And I heard about him. He came from Duke, and he's dunking, and I mean, he's just really playing great. And I played basketball coming up. And so I said, I got to get this guy on my team. And so I ran into him. And I said, hey, why don't we play basketball and so on and so forth? He goes, yeah, sure. He goes, hey, would you like to come to my Bible study? And I go, okay, if I go to this Bible study, I got him. Draft choice, top draft choice right here. I went to the Bible study. Collin, he never played on my team, but I ended up becoming a Christian being around him and getting to know him. And not only did I never play on his team, and not only did I become a Christian, I ended up playing for his team, and we made it to like the semifinals of the league, which was 103 teams, and that's how I became a Christian. And so that's the story right there. And I was a religious nun. And so for people out there who say, "Oh, these religious nuns, they don't want to go to church," well, I didn't want to go to church, but I didn't even know what church was. And I think that we have to always work very hard to frame church as I think we experience it. And I think some of that involves, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but some of that involves learning to speak the language of spirituality, not the language of religiosity. Not there's anything wrong with our culture in our churches, but we have to learn how to speak to people and meet them where they are.
This latest research from Pew Research, you shared a few statistics. You mentioned that this has been, and I remember it's been a number of years now that they've been following this group of nuns, and it has been increasing. I understand in this latest report, there are thoughts maybe it's leveling off. What are we seeing related to that?
Yeah, it is leveling off. I mean, I think it's a couple of percentage points, but I think what's important, Ryan Burge, who I know you're familiar with, he has a Substack, and he's written 2 books on the nuns, wrote one and then updated it. But one of the interesting things in his most recent Substack is he has a category called unclassified. And I think this is really important because they don't know what to do with these people. They can't put them in a category. And so I was looking at the graph and okay, this is not my expertise, but I'm looking at the graph and I'm looking at, I'm going, okay, I see the unclassifieds increasing and I see the nuns decreasing a little bit. I think what we've got is a population in America that this is from my personal experience. So forget expertise. My experience is in our church, we have people come who have no intention of coming to church. They think, well, everybody who goes to church is of a certain persuasion, politically, socially. There's a lot of judgment being made, which is funny because we're always told Christians are judging. There's a lot of judgments being made about what Christians think or don't think. Yeah. And when they actually come and they're around, they start to go, oh, I didn't know this was what it was like. And in many ways, that's what happened to me. I got there and I was like, oh, I've known people who go to church my whole life, but I've never given them a chance to go into the church and be a part of it. And so the reason I mentioned that is it leveling off? Yeah, statistically the nuns are, but we see unclassifieds. And also we know for a fact that there are many people who would call themselves affiliated who really don't go to church other than like holidays or whatever. So to me, I think it's a huge opportunity for us to open our eyes, as Jesus talks about in John chapter 4, and say, hey, the fields, they're ripe for harvest. There are people who want it, but we have to kind of grow, or at least some of our churches have to choose to grow to be, if I can get a little biblical on this one, to be more Gentile churches where we go, our mission's going to be to make sure we open the doors and make God accessible to folks who maybe don't automatically want to be a part of a church.
You're in the area, the Bay Area, and of course, that's near a very highly secular Silicon Valley. What type of people are you encountering in your church, and what is it that's drawing them in the very first time? I mean, many of these people who are nuns or unclassified may not even ever have a desire to walk through the doors of the church. So how are you getting them to come in the first place?
That's an excellent question. I can tell you think about this, and that's a great question. Well, there's two things we do, and one of the things we do on our website that I think is helpful, bacc.c, is we answer the question, "Who are we?" for those who visit. We don't use a mission statement because nuns are not looking for a mission statement. They're trying to figure out, who are you and what does church look like? And so two of the features that we explain are making God known, and that's something that Jesus did. I think it's John 1:18, and then doing good. And that's Acts 10, where Jesus went around doing good. And so what we understand is that Jesus was not only bringing the gospel, but Jesus often was doing good, and that allowed people to become, or to receive, an accessibility to God and an accessibility to the spiritual experience of following Jesus without necessarily doing it. And so we explain that a lot. And the people we're encountering are people who have never, ever had any experience with church, or have had a less than inspired experience with church. By that, I don't mean negative. I mean, they just went, I don't see how this helps my life. And so we try to be in a position with, and I live in Silicon Valley specifically, we try to be in a specific position where we're understanding that there's some brilliant people in our area that have a lot of faith in science, which I do too, that have a lot of faith in technology. I believe technology helps us overcome our human limits, but that don't understand that there are limits to what science can do and limits to what technology can do. And one of the great things about the study on the nuns is it says that among the nuns, a number of them believe that science has its limits, that there are things that science can't explain. And among the nuns, a number of them talk about the fact that they believe in the soul and they believe in the spirit. And I'm sort of combining the spirituality study together. But so we find people who are very open-minded, but think that Christianity is not the solution to very many things. And so our goal is to make sure they know it is. And one of the things we do is doing good. And so some of the things we do is one we're very excited about. I'm a parent of two special needs kids, and we've created a program called eLife. And so what that is that's an inclusive sports program and an inclusive life program where typical kids and adults combine with special needs kids and adults for mentoring and for playing together. So the sports actually are not where people just go and help special needs folks to be involved in sports. They participate with them in it. And that produces lifelong friendships. For instance, my son started out when we launched the first e-soccer program, and it's been an award-winning one. Jefferson Award was one for it. I ended up getting, not because I'm a great guy, I ended up getting a congressional citation because of it, but it's because we put together 8 parents and about 10 kids and went to a field across from my house where geese were constantly laying dung, and we had to rake it up all the time. And we just got the kids learning how to play. And one of the ways we did that is I'd read an article that said that in the world, soccer is more popular than any other sport because it comes easiest. That foot-to-eye coordination is easier and quicker than hand-to-eye. And of course, I was a hand-to-eye guy, and I went, well, my sons are going to need a little help. And when we went to foot-to-eye, it's like they blossomed, and then a bunch of kids started playing. And we went from like 8 kids to now thousands of kids in different parts of the country and the world participate in these programs. And we have partnerships with the major sports programs in the Bay Area in soccer and in football. We have an e-football and in basketball. And so these things have allowed people to come and take a look and say, wow, and here's the key. There need be no religious affiliation. We have no expectation of you going to church or being a Christian. You can be Buddhist, you can be Hindu, you can be atheist. We just want to help. And what that's done is it's allowed people to see church in a way that they never saw it before, personally helping them, aggressive, in which a lot of people think Christians are trying to be aggressive, which I don't think Christians are trying to be aggressive, but just, a very loving and caring environment. And what that turns into with those combos of making God known and doing good, you just see some amazing things. We're one of the top toy drive givers in the area every Christmas. We get our kids involved. We do trunk or treats and we open them to the neighborhood. I'm in a building right now that's in a neighborhood where we have trunk or treat every year, and people just come for the trunk or treat. Then they go home, but then some go to church. And what happens sometimes, about 4 weeks ago, a woman was riding her bike down the street and she heard singing coming from our church. She stopped and walked on in and said, "What's going on here?" And she stayed. And then after she got done, she said, "Hey, I want one of those prayer partners you were talking about to hang out with." And I think it's just because we're in the community, we're engaged in the community, and we're trying to do good.
I love hearing that story. I think it's so helpful for us to understand, some specific ideas about how to engage people and begin to develop relationships even before they come through the doors. But that is often what brings them. I know there's been a lot of research done over the years that people are far more likely to come to church if they're invited by someone they know than just walking in the doors of a church. So it can be as simple as just making that invitation at some point. One of the things you talked about earlier as well, Russ, was the language we use. Talk for a moment about communication, how important communication is, and the kind of language we use, the religiosity versus today's common man and woman speaking together.
Yeah, and first I should say I have made so many mistakes in this area that a whole volume, a whole book. We talked a little earlier off mic about editing, and I wish you'd been walking alongside of me to edit me, because I would have made a much better impression on a lot of people. So it's taken years. So no one should ever be discouraged or feel bad about mistakes we make or things we learn as we go along the path, and that leads to the spirituality part. Being an agnostic and not being familiar with church, when I went in, what happened to me, and I had a positive experience in a lot of ways, in all ways, even the hard things were good learning experiences. Even the failure was good learning experiences. But I didn't understand. Like, I remember walking into church and they were singing. Well, I'd sang at a pep rally, the fight song for our school. I'd sang at a concert, but I'd never been in a church. And I remember someone handed me this is back in the day, someone handed me a songbook, and I was like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And I didn't even understand that they say out the song number. And I'm aging myself really big time here. They give you the number of the page you're supposed to turn to it. And then guys were hugging, and then they were using words like righteousness and redemption. And I just never heard these words. And so it was almost like I'd walked into a place that spoke a foreign language. What happened is I began to conform to it. I began to figure, okay, I got to learn this language. I got to learn how to act this way. And then I developed behavior, but I didn't develop the inner life. And so it led to challenges. So what that has done is it's helped me understand that when people come in that are from a nun's background, an agnostic, an atheist background, a non-church going background, we have to meet them with spirituality. And one of the scriptures I've been meditating on a bit is John 3, 5-10 about being born again. But what it says there, and I think it's the New Living, is it says only God and only the Spirit produce spiritual life. And one of the things that can happen is we can all get frustrated by, the grind of sometimes legalism or feeling guilty about not following rules and all that. And spiritual language is the language of God focus, not being focused on people, not being focused on who's preaching the sermon, not being focused on who's getting attention, but being focused on God. That's the source with which we can forgive people, be patient, accept and be content with our life. So God focus is a big part of it. I think the language of spirituality is a language of love, of hope, of caring, it's a language of grace, of being able to be reasonable and understanding. It's a language of patience. It's a language of joy. And it provides solutions to people's lives. It gives them hope. And I think you can see it all over the scriptures, but it begins by reading the Bible and I think knowing two things, at least from my perspective. One, the Bible is first and foremost a book about God, not about people. And I think I have to always remind myself I'm supposed to be learning about God. And then second is always understanding that what we have to do is point people to God and not to ourselves and not to our wisdom and not to our ideas. And it produces a culture, I think, that's spiritual. And we got a long way to go. Trust me, like I'm talking about these things and I almost feel like, what am I doing? Because if I put this measure up against our church, we've got a long way to go. So I don't want anybody to make the mistake of thinking, hey, he's got the answers. No, I've read the Bible and I see what you see, but I'm trying to implement it.
It's a journey. We're all on the journey together.
That's it.
You talked a couple of times about some of the preconceived ideas that the nuns and people outside the church have about us. One of the things I know that concerns you as well is that we check our own preconceived notions and ideas about those who are in those categories outside the church before we engage with them. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, one of the things and again, I want to reiterate, and I appreciate what you said about we're all on the journey. Almost everything I've learned is from people that I'm surrounded by in our church, in the Bay Area Christian Church, which is really great. We have a lot of consensus and peer groups where we talk to each other, and circles that help me personally to reflect on who I am and what I'm like and how I see the world. And then in the same way, us all developing culture where we look at people and realize, hey, until we get to know people, we shouldn't make a judgment about them. 47% of the people in the Pew Research poll on nuns cited their lack of involvement with the church being because of criticisms or dislike of religious organizations. And so I think that one of the things is to understand that criticism or dislike is not personal. I think sometimes we can take it as Christians personally, and even sometimes things are said that are really negative, that are personal, but we have to understand that's often coming from a place that I would equate with like racism. Sometimes people come across racists that are just uneducated about differences. And so it's about educating them and helping them understand. In the same way, what we have to do is have empathy and say, this person simply doesn't understand what I'm about. And they need to, like you referenced earlier, they need to get to know me. And as they get to know me, they'll go, oh, I didn't know a Christian was like that. I was at my older sister's wedding some years ago, and she was getting married, and her husband had like 4 brothers. And then we were all standing around, and I played, like I mentioned earlier, hoops. And I started talking trash about, the game. And, I just play. I don't try to be Christian in particular when I'm playing basketball. The guys are like, wait a minute. We heard you're a minister. And I'm like, yeah. They go, no way, you can't be a minister. No minister. I've never had a minister talk like that. Or, and I think what we have to do is break those preconceived notions by being authentically ourselves and not holding ourselves to that sort of, that tape rolling in our head, that recording in our head that says, I got to be perfect. I can't make any mistakes. Be yourself and share your weaknesses and share your hopes, your dreams. And I think the more authentic we are, the further we'll get. And that comes from looking at people and understanding they're not expecting perfection. What they're expecting really is a friend, you mentioned that earlier, and someone who's real. And I think when we do that, we're seeing people for who they are rather than what we might think they are.
Maybe just to kind of conclude our time together, you've been talking about many different areas of engagement and involvement. I think they're all very practical based on what we're seeing in the research for either an individual who wants to do this in their own lives, or maybe somebody who's part of a church that is wanting their church to do a better job of reaching the nuns. Maybe just a couple of things to start off with.
Understanding that your life is attractive. I think sometimes we look at our failures and we get so discouraged. 2 Corinthians 12 talks about boasting in our weaknesses, and there's a lot of ways to look at that. One way I'd like to say is understanding your weaknesses can help people. When we had our kids with special needs, autism and Down syndrome, it was a challenging thing, and that's a journey all in and of itself. But what we began to learn, and my wife was ahead of me on this, which is probably no surprise to those who are listening, is she took the position of saying, I think we need to help other people who are in this situation, because at the time there were very few services available. So we leaned into our weaknesses, and surprise, surprise, it ended up helping tons of people. We have a spiritual resource ministry in our church where people with special needs kids can come to church, put their kid in a spiritual resource ministry where people understand how to include their kid and be involved with them. Now, I'm going to tell on myself a little bit because I mentioned e-soccer program before. Well, when I started the e-soccer program, I did it for my kids. I wanted my boys to have a great time because I didn't see a program they could be in where they could really be happy and enjoy themselves. And a woman drove by and she said, "Oh man, I want to get my kid in here. Can I join?" I go, "No, this is something I'm doing for my kids, right?" And it's not really a program, because at that time we were just gathering, people around. I was like, I didn't know her, and I came home and told my wife, "Yeah, this lady came by, and I finally got something for the boys, and I really don't want to have a bunch of people getting in here. I got it all set up." She goes, "What are you doing? This is the whole point." And then I was like, "Oh no." So I got a hold of the lady. She came, and before you knew it, we outgrew the place we were at. It exploded. So I'd say lean into your weakness and don't be ashamed of it. Don't be embarrassed by it. And the second thing is, we can often feel so guilty for our failures. And I think we have to give ourselves a break. So don't give in to the discouragement of thinking, "I've got nothing to offer." Trust me, you have so much. The idea of faith and resilience in following Jesus is an idea, if shared, that can change lives and give hope to many. So those are a couple of things I'd mention.
Russ Ewell, he is currently the executive minister of the Bay Area Christian Church. We will link you in today's program and podcast notes, and we'll connect you with some of the information that he shared with you as well. Russ, so great to have you on the program today. God bless you in your ministry and your work. And sounds like you all are off to a great start already. We'll hope that that number of nuns continues to steady off and maybe begin to decline as people get more engaged, as Christians get more engaged in sharing their lives outside of the four walls of the church.
Thank you, Collin. I feel like I learned from you asking me questions. I've been taking notes in my mind about things I want to grow in just from all the questions. Thank you very much. What a great experience. You have a wonderful work that you're doing for everybody, and I would encourage everybody to keep listening and sharing your great content.